Okay, so why are we going through all of this in this kind of detail? Mainly because what I've seen in working with patients and working with humanity is that we all have within us this phenomenal potential. This potential that I've chased for 40 years to try to understand. And this potential is the substance of faith. And I have spent untold hours thinking about, looking at, and trying to understand the operation of faith in humanity. Because I saw long before I had any significant faith, I saw that when faith is operational, it's the most potent thing there is. There's nothing that can stand in its way. I saw it as a third-year medical student in ICUs and in the wards and in the patients that I was taking care of, that it made the difference between health and disease. It made the difference between life and death. It made the difference between ability and disability. And it was, medicine's always called it the intangible. And when I would ask my superiors, when I would observe this in the people's lives in my schooling, I would ask, well, what is this? What caused that to happen? And everybody who is an observer of humanity can't help but observe the fact that we all have this potential. But unfortunately, the world doesn't know what to attribute this potential to, and that's what we're delving into here. But in medicine, it's referred to as Mother Nature and Father Time. And I was constantly hearing the answer to my questions when I would pose a question as to why this happened or why that happened and why did somebody get better and somebody didn't. It was a factor of Mother Nature and Father Time. And that was the only explanation I got. Well, I spent the rest of these 35 years in medical practice trying to figure out this whole thing. So I want to share that with you because if there's any doubt, if there's any doubt in your mind about the administration or the application or operation or manifestation of faith, doubt, that element of doubt will negate it. And as my faith board shows there, we have this tremendous receptacle of faith, and then we have this channel through which faith flows, just like water, just like electricity. Anything that flows can be directed and can be regulated. And those red clamps, again, on the flow of faith from our spirit organ through our soul and down to our body, those red clamps, to a great degree, are clamps that are having to do with unbelief, misbelief, lies, and just misunderstanding that we have about the operation of faith in the human soul and body. And I want to dissolve those elements of doubt and those elements of unbelief so that there's a free flow, because the free flow is what leads to our healing. So let's continue. Last time we were talking about the actual structure and function of the universe. And I want to share with you again, to begin with, just to set a precedent for what it is that we're talking about here. So in Colossians 1:15, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature? The firstborn of every creature. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. So that pretty much establishes the centrality and the preeminence of Christ. That's who we're talking about here. So we'll go to John, first chapter. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So everything in the beginning, as it exists today, everything, and this is what I'm going to go through and work to try to provide evidence for, that everything in the universe, everything that was made by God in the universe, can be drawn to the centrality and the importance of Christ, because he is that everything. He is that everything in the universe. As we talked about in the first chapter of Genesis, we talked about the sequence of God speaking his word, followed by the creation of water, followed by the energizing of the water from the sun after the light was created. And that following the word, water, and light came life. And we talked about life being the motion. In fact, life is motion. In terms of defining the absence of life, defining death, for a long time I couldn't understand what death was. I mean, I went to school to understand all about life, but in what I do, you're also exposed to a lot of death. And I remember even in medical school, I would ask to be called when I was on call as a student in the VA or the university hospital where I was in Wisconsin, that I would be called when somebody died. And it was for selfish reasons, because at that time, the only time that we had as students that we could actually practice our procedures, life-saving procedures like intubations and intracardiac epinephrine and the kind of things that we did, the only time you could do that, we didn't have the models and things like that we have today. The only time you could do that was on a cadaver. You could do that on a person who had died. So I would call and ask to be called when somebody died. And I sat in a lot of hospital rooms in the middle of the night when nobody was around with a dead person. I'd look at that person, and I would, a lot of them I'd seen other times during the day when they were alive, and I'd look at them when they were dead, and I would wonder, what is the difference? What is missing here? And you go back and you look at what is death. I mean, for centuries, mankind has asked himself, what is the difference between life and death? And I went back to my molecular biology days, and I remember looking at cells in a microscope and looking at the viability of a living cell, and then putting that living cell in a toxic environment, and the cell would die. And looking at the structure of the cell to define what death was, and not being able to define it, not being able to discern it. I mean, I've wondered this to the point where I've literally drawn blood on patients that were imminently going to die. I've drawn blood on patients, and within the hour of their death, and then immediately following their death, I've drawn blood on dozens of patients, because I've wondered, well, what is the difference? What happens? What is their sodium, their potassium? What happens to all of these biological markers? What happens to that when somebody dies? And it was amazing to me to find that immediately after death, there was no difference. I mean, the biochemistry of that human laying there, it was no different, alive versus being dead. And I really began to wonder, well, what in the world is life? You know, we know that there's a life force. I mean, that's been documented in the history of medicine for centuries, that there's a force that causes life. Well, what is that force? And only until recently has it become understood really what life is all about, and not what it's about, but what life is. And that's what's lacking. That's the difference when you look at a cell under a microscope. A cell, a live cell versus a dead cell. The difference is that the dead cell, there's no motion. It has the same biochemistry, it has the same molecular biology, but there's no motion to it. And now they've actually come up with an electron microscope that has a magnetic resonance attachment to it that actually listens to the sound of life. And whether you know it or not, but each one of us have a sound. we not only do each one of us have a sound, but we also have a light. We emit light. And what happens when a cell dies, it's amazing. I was watching this under an electron microscope. An electron force microscopy is what it's called. And here was a cell that was living. And then the experimenter actually tightened the electron force microscope down on the slide, and it squished the cell, and it killed the cell. And here was the difference. Here was life. And then here was when the immediate cell died. Life. Death. Vibratory frequency is the difference between life and death. And just as Tesla said, as we saw last time, the brilliant physicist that said, if you want to understand the universe, you have to understand energy, frequency, and vibration. Every single thing in life that vibrates. Life is motion. And when you stop motion, that's what defines death. And it was amazing to me when I was listening to that electron force microscopy, and all of a sudden here was this high-pitched sound, and then just as an instant it got cut off, and that's what death was. And it was the first time I really conceptualized how important this factor is, this physical factor is in understanding us. Because at the source of that vibratory frequency of life is the hand of God. That's where that comes from. And I'm going to show you tonight, that what that vibratory frequency is when you boil it down. I'm talking about past the stage of material. Past the stage of material reality. I'm talking about the stuff that's out here in this empty space that surrounds us all. This empty space not only is around us, that you can see and grab a handful of it, but it's also, that's what we're made of. We have that empty space throughout our human bodies. Every single cell in the human body is 99.999% empty space. And all that empty space is filled with this life force, this vibratory frequency, that when you boil it down to the lowest denominator is Jesus. That's who it is. It's not a thing. It's not a thing, and it's not a what. It's not a substance. It's not matter. There's no weight to it. But it's the presence of Jesus himself. He is the substance of all things. He's the substance of all creatures. He's the substance of all living things. Okay, so let's take that profound reality and take a step backwards and go back to our talking here about what happens in the universe when God spoke things into existence. When God spoke, he injected information into the water. His spirit hovered over the water, as it's described in Genesis. And that spirit was imparting information into the water. And the information became energized when there was the creation of light. And Albert Einstein described that as the photoelectric effect. When light hits water, right now, the light that we see in this room right here are little packets of energy called photons. And those photons are coming into our eyes and hitting our eyes, and that's how we're able to see things. But when those photons hit water, it energizes the electrons in the water, and water becomes polarized, like I've got drawn here. The oxygen, water is simple H2O. The oxygen becomes separated from the hydrogen at certain angles and certain molecular formulas to determine this. But what it amounts to is that the oxygen all lines up and the hydrogen atoms all line up so that you get a difference in charge, positive and negative. And wherever there's a difference in charge in the universe, the law of the universe is that you're going to get a flow of electrons, which is the negative charge here, toward the positive. And if you have a light bulb here, that flow of electrons from this negative part here to the positive part will actually illuminate that light. This is the flow of energy. This is the flow of electrons. Electrons, let me go to a different diagram here. Anyway, the atom is made up of a nucleus which contains protons and neutrons, and it has electrons around the outside in a cloud. And this, the first time that man has ever taken an actual photograph of an atom was August of 2012 was the first time that we have ever actually taken a picture of an atom. And we had the picture of the hydrogen atom. And that hydrogen atom showed up and a hydrogen atom is made up of a proton in the nucleus and one electron. It's simple. This is a hydrogen atom here. This center part is the proton, and the red part, that's the electron. That's what hydrogen is. And the first time that I actually gave this series was when God had revealed to me the importance of hydrogen. And I'll tell you how that happened. I was, because I've always been looking for an explanation for life, but I was sitting in class one day at CBC, and we were studying the Old Testament, and we were studying Jeremiah, and Wendell Parr was teaching it. And he came to Jeremiah 33:3. It said, "Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not." And when Wendell read that, he said that his own revelation from this was God talking to him on a telephone. It says, "Call unto me." So he was saying, he envisioned this as God talking to him on a telephone. And of course, Wendell Parr and I are from the same generation. Telephones to us mean telephone wires and telephone lines. And that's the way he was describing it. And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, that isn't true for today. We don't have telephone wires anymore. We have cell phones. And cell phones operate without wires. It's a wireless system. So could it be that God is telling me through this that he's going to talk to me, he's going to call unto me, and he's going to answer me, and he's going to tell me great and mighty things that I knowest not? And when he said that, I, for some reason or other, I got the impression that hydrogen was the way that he was going to show me great and mighty things that I knowest not. Now, don't ask me why. I mean, I don't walk around all day thinking about hydrogen. I'll guarantee you. In my natural mind, I don't do that. But that day, hydrogen popped into my mind, and that was going to be the way that God was going to show me great and mighty things. So I started studying hydrogen. What in the world am I studying hydrogen for? And I come to find out that every molecular structure in the human body is a protein. Every little molecular molecule in our body, every little machine that operates our body is made up of proteins. That's the substance, physical substance of life. Do you know how proteins are held together? Do you know what binds a protein together? Is a hydrogen bond. Without hydrogen, there are no proteins being held together. Amino acids come together to form a protein. What bind the amino acids together are hydrogen bonds. Okay, so then I'm thinking, what more significance is there? So I go to my love of my life, other than my wife. Hi, Jude. And the Lord, DNA. Somebody called me Dr. DNA the other day. So I went to DNA, and I I'm studying about stem cells and DNA research. Well, how do researchers take a DNA molecule apart? I said last time, science has shown, our history of the Earth has shown that a 7,000-year-old seed blooms and produces a fruit, and that information in that DNA molecule has sat there dormant for 7,000 years. That's a pretty safe keeping place to put something. How in the world does a researcher break DNA down to start studying the elements that make up DNA? So I started thinking about it and started looking at the DNA molecule, and what binds these two helixes together, what bind them together in the center here are, guess what kind of bonds? Hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen holds DNA together. So here, in a short period of time, a few nights of just recollection and restudy, and all of a sudden, hydrogen becomes paramount in my mind because God showed that to me, that hydrogen not only holds all of our proteins together by binding our amino acids together, it also holds our DNA together. And hydrogen is the receiving molecule in water that receives the information that God injected into the universe in the very beginning. That's where the information comes from. So when I called to God, I all of a sudden began to get this vision. He's going to be talking to me through the hydrogen ion, through the hydrogen. And hydrogen happens to be the simplest, most prevalent atom and element in the entire universe, is simple hydrogen. So God created hydrogen with one proton and one electron. It doesn't get any simpler than that. That is the simplest atom there is. But it also is the most prevalent atom. And as I said last time, 99.9% of all the molecules in the human body are water molecules that are made up of hydrogen, simple hydrogen and oxygen. So after God created the hydrogen, and he does this through his mind. He does this through his faith. He does this the exact same way that we have the capability to do this. He does this because his thoughts, like our thoughts, actually affect protons and neutrons. It affects the physical substance of the universe. So it does not too much of a stretch for God then to take, once he's got protons and neutrons and electrons formed, well, he can make any element there is. Because it's just a matter of shifting these elements around. So he comes up with 4 simple elements to create life: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. I mean, simple elements. There's only 92 elements in the known universe. Now, there may be more that we haven't discovered yet, but right now there's only 92 elements in the known universe. And all we're talking about here, we're talking about the substance of life. The substance of life is only those 4 elements. That makes up all the proteins in our body. That makes up the DNA in the body with a few little additions. But it's hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Now, the important thing, taking a step back to hydrogen, is the important thing is that when just to create this is not creating anything that has any potential for life. What does this have to do in order for life to spring from it is that it has to be in motion. It has to be in motion. Life is motion. Life is vibration. Life is frequency. And that's exactly what happens to this electron out here in this cloud. Our concept, before we had this picture taken in 2012, our concept of an atom was that there was a fixed orbit that the electron circulated the nucleus in. And that fixed orbit doesn't exist. It was a figment of our imagination. That's just not the way God made it. He made a cloud, and in this realm of the electron, not only is there motion, but the electron is spinning around the nucleus, and it's also rotating around itself, just exactly like planet Earth exists in the universe. So in order to come up, going from just pure water to coming to actually create life on this planet Earth, God just added a few other elements, elements that appear on the periodic table, and he had enough building materials to create life. And again, the factor that carries the information and energy in this thing called life is the motion of this electron around this proton. That's what carries the information of life. I'll give you a current day example of that. You all know about MRI scans. Okay? So here is why is it that an MRI scan will show up a cancer in the lung and differentiate that lung cancer from normal lung tissue? What's the difference between cancerous lung tissue and normal lung tissue? No, it's a living tissue. It's alive. Yeah, the difference is in the position of the electron in the hydrogen that makes up the cell. Every cell has a magic magnetic moment, and that's this right here. If I spin this, there's I can't do it with two hands because I can't hold this microphone, but if I had two hands, I could hold this, and in spinning this, there would be no major wobble to this because the electron is in this position right here. Well, that's a normal cell. But what happens with an MRI scan is that you slide yourself into this big magnet. This big magnet magnetizes all the hydrogen ions in your body. That's how MRI scans work, is that they affect this electron. That's all they do, is they affect this electron. And an electron in a cancer cell is out of sync. And this is what happens to a cell that's a cancer cell. You see how that wobbles? That's a diseased cell. The difference between a diseased cell is this. Versus that. Why? Because this has a different vibratory frequency to it than this. So to give you another example, the normal cell, this right here, communicates with this electron, has its vibratory frequency, has a sound, has its own sound to it. So it would be like this cell is speaking a language we can understand. And this cancer cell, diseased cell, that's over here wobbling around like this, is speaking a language that we can't even interpret. And the information that comes from this simple little hydrogen atom is the information that the whole body listens to. Now, we know the importance of listening to a word, don't we? I mean, what was it that formed the universe in the very beginning? God spoke a word. That's a vibratory frequency. He spoke his word out into the universe. That word carried with it information and energy. And that's been transmitted to every single thing in the universe, has received a vibratory frequency, information and energy. And the difference between normal cells and sick cells is that right there, is that difference. Now, why is this important? Because what you and I have an internal technology within our brains and within our hearts that affect the position of that electron. Our brain and our heart emit not only electrical energy, but also magnetic energy. And every physics book and every chemistry textbook will say that if you put an electron in a field of energy, a field of electrical energy or magnetic energy, you'll change the character of that electron. So that means when you're walking around thinking of resentment or anger or hostility, you're emitting an electromagnetic energy that's affecting every electron in your body. And probably every electron in the body sitting next to you. And I'm dead serious when I say that. And I'm just going to digress for a second, but I had a spinal cord injury. And one of my healing stories is that I was healed after 7 reconstructive spine operations, healed from a paralyzed bladder and paralysis in my lower extremities, but just unrelenting chronic pain. And I was studying about what effect chronic pain has on somebody with a spinal cord injury, because I happen to be that somebody. And I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do about it? And in the process of all my studying, I noticed there was an article in there where they studied the spouses of men that had chronic, unrelenting back pain. And just by happenstance, a woman who was participating with her husband in this study, she laid down on the functional MRI scan they were doing of her husband's brain to find out how that chronic pain was affecting his brain. And they did an MRI scan on her brain, just as a joke. Well, guess what her brain showed? Showed the exact same thing that her husband had. She was suffering from the pain in her brain. She had the exact same areas of her brain highlighted on a functional MRI scan as her husband did. So when we become connected to people, we impart information and energy. We exchange information and energy. Takes a whole new slant on who you hang around with, doesn't it? Don't leave. Okay, so the point I wanted to establish is God injecting through His Word information and energy into the universe. It comes in with the energizing of the light, the photons hitting the electrons, energizing the electrons, and all of a sudden, electrons look like they are the carriers of information and energy at one level of operation in the universe. Now, information can be carried. You know, we all know about. Let's see, where is Here's a chemical molecule. Listen, do you realize that thoughts and emotions produce chemical molecules in the brain, in the body, in the brain and body? So this is a chemical molecule. This is cortisol. This is the hormone that's made from stress in the body. And when this molecule carries with it, therefore, the information of stress in the body, and the presence of this molecule has a vibratory frequency to it, it has a sound to it that cells pick up, and they begin to alter their function because of the presence of this molecule. So molecules carry information. But even below the molecule level is where I'm talking about. This is a great big molecule here. I'm talking about something a lot less than this. I'm talking about just a simple hydrogen atom is capable of carrying information and energy. And I keep going back to the hydrogen because, I mean, the information has shown that human thought and emotion affects electrons. And electrons are what God created to carry information. So that means that we have the capability, through directing our thoughts and through directing our emotions, to affect the electrons in our body. So if we have a cell that's operating like this, and all of a sudden that cell becomes disorganized, and for whatever reason that cell becomes sick and starts operating like this, sending out this information, and every single cell in the body listens to this information. It's a party line. There are 50 trillion cells in the human body. They're all listening to the same party line. They're all picking up on this. And all you have to do is have one cell wobbling like this, and everybody's saying, hey, did you see so-and-so? Did you see how that guy was wobbling? Man, he must have been drunker than a skunk. So this information highway goes on, And guess how we have the capability of taking this back to its original state? It's through what we believe. Because what we believe is based on what our thoughts and what our emotions are. So through belief, we can take this back to this state right here, based on what we believe. That's the importance of belief. Okay, so we've got the importance of the electron, the importance of the hydrogen atom. Let me just look at this diagram here. This shows how significant that water demonstration that I had on the previous page is because when you look inside the human organism, when you look inside the human body, every single cell is surrounded by and has water inside the cell. And the water in the cell acts just like the previous water that we saw at the foundation of the universe. That water gets polarized, and cells have a negative, because of the polarization of the water, cells have a negative charge to them. The water on the outside has a positive charge to it. So every single cell in our body is polarized like this. And in order for that cell to move, there has to be the flow of electrons. What are the carriers of the information and energy in our body? It's those electrons. Those electrons carry, they go from the negative to the positive. That's the law of nature. That's the law of God that operates the universe, always trying to neutralize itself. So the level of high electrons are going to flow, and the electrons are going to flow, and there's going to be energy emitted. That's how cells operate. Now, the next diagram I've got is the actual diagram of a nerve. The way the nerve conducts the way a nerve conducts information is through the flow of the positive and negative inside and out of the cell. You can see the arrows showing the line of direction of nerve conduction there. Well, what is it that causes that nerve conduction? It's a simple matter of positive and negative chemicals flowing into and out of a nerve. That's what creates the electrical impulse that carries the information down the nerve. So then, you've got the information coming down a nerve. In order for a human to move, what does that nerve have to be connected to? It has to be connected to a muscle. Muscles are how God created us to move. That's what creates our motion. Our gross motor motion is from muscles. Okay, so here you've got the nerve impulse coming down this nerve through the flow of electrons into and out of the nerve, which is mediating this electrical impulse. It comes down, and of course it transmits this information with chemical molecules. But at the basis of this chemical molecule, it's the electrical charge in this molecule that's carrying the information. So the information comes down to the muscle, and each muscle cell, just like each nerve cell, the way a muscle contracts or relaxes is, guess how? By the flow of positive to negative, negative to positive. Again, you've got a flow of electrons carrying this information. That's what causes the muscle to contract. So that's what causes the muscle to contract. Muscle contraction means our behavior. Humans behave by contracting muscles. So every single step of the way, us as human beings, we function and flow. We receive information, we digest the information, and the information comes out of us in the form of our behavior, all based on this flow of electrons, all based on this vibratory frequency, this sound message. And you know that the thoughts and emotions actually have been measured, and that the low vibratory frequency sounds of emotion are the emotions of anger, resentment, and fear. If you could put a microphone in the mid part of your brain where your emotional center is, and tell you to start thinking of anger and fear, what the inside of your brain would sound like is this. And if I tell you, okay, now imagine yourself in a state of appreciation and love. Think about all that God has done for you. Think about all of the measures that Christ has obtained for you, all of the abundance that He's obtained for you. A pure state of love. This is what it sounds like. It's literally true. There are high frequency and low frequency vibratory frequencies, and those vibratory frequencies, again, guess what? They're being picked up by every single cell in the human body. So when you're walking around in a constant state of fear, or a constant state of resentment, or a constant state of anger, your body is being constantly bombarded with low frequency sounds. And those low frequency sounds over a period of time cause the cell to go from this to that. That's the origin of disease. It's amazing, isn't it? And God has given us the capability to know this and to understand this. But above and beyond that, He's given us the capability to do something about it. He's given us the capability to go from the wobble to go back to our magnetic magic moment, which is total health. He's given us that capability. And it's the substance of His Word that takes us back to this. It's not just any old sound that takes us back to this. It's the sound of His Word. It's the power of His Word. Because as I said before, this is the simplest atom in the universe right here. This is the simplest atom in the universe. If we're looking at a hierarchy, so here's an atom. Now molecules are way up here in this hierarchy of physical kingdom. Okay, we're talking about the physical kingdom now. You can see atoms, you can see molecules. So we're talking about the physical kingdom. But below this area, down here in this basement, down here in the forming structure of the universe, are all of those things below the atom. And I'm sure you've all heard of the CERN laboratory in France. I'm just kidding. I'm sure a lot of you heard about the CERN laboratory in France or the Fermi laboratory in Chicago. These are nuclear accelerators. One's 26 miles in circumference, and the other, I think, in Fermi lab in Chicago is 3.5 miles. But what these laboratories do is these laboratories shoot atoms like this and particles out around this 26 miles, and they accelerate the speed that this stuff travels at, and it has them collide. And then the scientists look at the result of that collision to find out what is it made up of. What is the simplest, smallest thing there is in the universe that makes up all of the universe? That's what theology has been all about. That's what science has been all about. Do you realize that scientists and theologians are looking for the exact same thing? They're using different languages to define it and to talk about it, but they're looking for the exact same thing. What is life all about? Where did that come from? Where am I going? What am I made of? What's my purpose for being here? That's what every single scientist in the universe is looking for, the same as every single theologian. But see, science diverted from theology because science began to limit itself back in the 1600s to what it could see with its eyes, what it could measure, and what it could reproduce. Well, if you just go by what you can see, what you can measure, and what you can reproduce, you never get below the atom. Because to date, that's the smallest thing we've been able to see. We got a picture of it, is an atom. But there's a whole lot of stuff down here below the atom that's going on that we know about, and the reason we know about it is because we've taken these atoms and we've jammed them together, we've collided them in these nuclear accelerators, and when they collided, they shot off all kinds of stuff, and they begin to look at what is it? How did it break up? It's like taking an ice cube and hitting it with a hammer. That's like this. Nuclear accelerators take nuclear material and accelerate it and then hit it together, and then they look at what happens at the site of explosion. And what they're looking for is what is it that makes up the universe? What is the smallest thing that makes up the universe? Well, now all these nuclear accelerator labs are below the level of the atom. They know that the atom is made up of quarks and leptons, and these aren't even particles anymore. We're not talking particles now. We're talking about waves. We're talking about vibratory frequencies is what we're talking about. Vibratory frequencies down below this atom level. And I'm going into this because I had a question tonight about, prior to starting, about some of the nuclear accelerator labs and looking for the God particle and stuff like that. And then Christians have a tendency to, oh boy, stay away from that. That's heresy, that's heretical, and I mean, we don't want anybody tampering with our God. I got news for you. God has already written. He's already revealed himself right here. I'll guarantee you, science is not going to discover anything that doesn't align with this. Nothing. Because this is the source of everything. All the knowledgeable, truthful information in the universe is contained right here. And Christians don't need to worry about protecting God, because God's a big guy. And he's got himself covered. You bring him something smaller and you say, yeah, I made that. I also made what made that. Okay, so I'll go back and I'll find that and I'll bring it. Look at here, God. I made that too. I made the thing that made that. So that's another thing in the universe. Do you know that everything in the universe is made up of what it's made up of? I want you to look at this. Now, I've got an example of everything in the universe. I know it has to be everything in the universe because I got it at Walmart. But do you see how this big thing here is made up of a bunch of little things? And there's a repeat of every little thing. The only thing is the size, but this right here is no different than this right here. I mean, to look at this, to bring this closer to home, okay? Here is, and here's an example of God right here. Here's God. And here's an example of man. And man is made up of a bunch of little things that look like systems. Oh, okay. This is systems. This is organs. These are cells. The cells are made up of organelles. The organelles are made up of smaller organelles. And all of that is made up of DNA. So every single thing can be boiled down to a facsimile of itself. And if you, I want you to get your mind's eye around this, because this is the way everything in the universe. Walmart has proven it. Everything in the universe is made like that. We are little replicas of God. And if you can even take it to another element, is that you and I, the way we perceive this universe is how? Through our senses. We hear, we see, we touch, we taste, we feel. Well, how is God right now sensing the universe? He's sensing it because I get the concept that you and I are his sensors. He knows he's perceiving the universe. He's perceiving it through those of us that he lives in. We become his eyes. We perceive, we touch, we feel, and he knows that. Of course, he's got his son who actually came in the form of us, so he can tell him all about it. But even as he's telling him about it, he can still perceive everything that's going on in our universe because we're small replicas of him. We're sensors of him. So every single thing boils down to that. I guess the only term I could think of is that we live in a stacked universe. Everything is stacked. One on top of another. Everything is stacked. You keep getting smaller and smaller. And we're going to look at a diagram of that. This is a diagram right here. These things up here are big. These things down here are small. And we go from God's creation, just walking through God's creation. He created plants. I want to show you, I know you're not intending to be all biochemists, but I want to show you the significance of why God created plants first. So here God creates plants. Okay, now go back to our atoms. Everything is made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Those protons, neutrons, and electrons come together to form 92 different elements, really only 4 or 5 of which God really uses for life, and that's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And he adds some sunlight. You take carbon dioxide and water in a plant. A plant is made with organelles, a little organ in every cell of a plant that takes sunlight. It takes carbon dioxide and water, and it produces sugar. Sugar is a source of energy. Okay, it also produces energy for itself because it has to survive itself, and it also produces oxygen. So the next thing that he created, now why would God create an organism that eats sugar and breathes oxygen? Because he's already made plants that make sugar and give off oxygen. Do you see what a thoughtful, what a loving God we have? When you just look at the biochemistry of that simple little example, that's just one example, but it's a phenomenal example that plants produce sugar so that animals can eat that sugar. He also endowed plants with the capability of taking that sugar and metabolizing it for their own energy, but he's also given us our ability to form our energy by eating plants, and he's also given us a brand spanking new shot of fresh air through oxygen from the plant that made the sugar. So now he creates humans, animals. And what do? We take the sugar in plus oxygen, and we produce water, carbon dioxide, and the energy from the electrons contained in the sugar. That's what, sugar tastes good, but the reason it's energy to the human body is because the human body extracts electrons from it. And electrons carry what? Information and energy, which make body work. That's what runs this machine. So here's this organism of animals, us being the top, that produce the sugar in the presence of oxygen, which gives off water, carbon dioxide, and then our own energy. So now this water and carbon dioxide gets rechanneled back up to the plants that need, guess what? Water, carbon dioxide, and a little sunlight, and the process starts all over again. Do you see how neat this system is? And how simple it is? That God has created this for us? It just gives you every reason to want to protect every single one of those things. Okay, so I wanted to show a different diagram here. Let me get to it here. Okay, that diagram, I want you to imprint that in your mind, because we will continue as we march through this living organism called humans. You got to keep in mind that we're just 0.0001% of the entire universe. is the physicality of our universe. That 99.999% of the universe is stuff you can't see. It's the spiritual kingdom. So here's the diagram that I wanted to show here. So here's the big stuff up here at this top of the diagram, and here's the little stuff down here. So in other words, everything that's up here is derived from stuff down here. So here are the plants, the stars, the planets, the cosmos, everything that we can see. The early scientists and theologians, they were all doing the same thing. They were looking out and they were observing what they could observe to give reason and rationale for their existence. And what they could study is what they could see. And then below that level of what they could see existed cells, which they didn't know of at the time. It took a long time for mankind to even realize that we're made up of cells. You had to have a microscope in order to see a cell. So here then we have cells and we have tissues and organs which produce systems. Those systems are made up of molecules. Those molecules are made up of atoms. Those atoms, along with the whole 92 elements, are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And then there's a line across here in the structure of our universe. Every single thing in the top part of this page right here obeys certain scientific principles. This is our three-dimensional world. This is our three-dimensional world up here, okay? Everything that we can see is in our three-dimensional world. All of this stuff down here is in the fourth dimension. It obeys an entirely different set of laws of the universe. And we're just coming to understand that today. And in fact, you take the whole history of medicine. I mean, this isn't even taught in medical school today. This whole realm of existence isn't taught. It takes 17 years for an established scientific fact to enter into the mainline educational system. And this is stuff that we're talking about that's just been discovered in the last 4 or 5 years. So this is going to be another 10 years before this actually gets into the mainstream of our educational system, that people's minds and hearts are going to be open to this information. But the importance is that everything below this line right here, this subatomic area down here below the atom where the quarks and the leptons and everything are, all of these particles down here answer to the tune of a different set of laws than these do. So we have spiritual laws and we have physical laws. The laws that govern all of this stuff up here, this physical stuff, these are physical laws. These are the laws of the Spirit down here. And those are the ones that we're just coming into contact with. And that's why I am where I am. Because I realized this a few years ago, and I thought, well, I can't learn what's going on in the spiritual kingdom by going back to medical school. Because they don't acknowledge the fact that there is a spiritual kingdom. So I'm not going to get better. I may get better educated in the molecules of the day, but I'm below the molecule level in my understanding. I want to know what's down here that's at the substance, what's at the base of these molecules that operate in mankind. What is below that level, and that's where the spiritual kingdom comes in. So I'm scratching my head thinking, well, where do I go to understand this? Well, most people in science have grabbed a hold of this concept, and they've taken off to China and Tibet and to all over the place looking for Eastern religions to study to understand the spiritual kingdom. And so God told me, I said, where do I go to understand this spiritual kingdom, God? I know it's your kingdom. Where do I go? He said, I want to teach you about the depths of an Eastern religion. I said, oh, great. Christianity. Christianity is an Eastern religion. And I've thought to myself, why in the world doesn't somebody in science study Christianity? Because you know where all the laws are talked about? And all the ways of not only of appropriating, of handling the whole operation, the manifestation, all of those laws are talked about by a great teacher, the world tells us. His name was Jesus. It's God. And he came and talked to us about the kingdom. Guess what he's talking about? He's talking about this down here. This is the kingdom. These are the laws, the laws of Jesus' kingdom. These are the laws. This is the kingdom down here. And that's the exact same thing he was talking about to his disciples. He couldn't use physics and stuff because obviously they didn't understand that. That's why he used metaphors, and he used all of the parables that he used. He had to relate all this information to us in some way that we could understand. And now God has taken the veil off, and he's given us all kinds of new information about this spiritual kingdom down here. And I want to tell you, we're going to take a short break here, and then we'll come back, and I want to tell you about the spiritual laws that we know about that operate in this kingdom down here that have everything to do with how our body and soul operate. Because our body and our soul are under the direction of our spirit. And our spirit operates by these laws down here. And it'll blow you away when you understand the dynamics of what's going on in your physical body and soul at the direction of your spirit. So we'll just take about a 10-minute break here, and we'll come back and we'll get into the spiritual kingdom, and I'll tell you about what it is that you're made up of and what implications that has for you in your life.